I want to thank the Tangipahoa Democrats for having us here. I think it's important for the people in our district to understand what's happening with this court and what's happening with families in our district. This election is not about politics. It's not about parties. It's about families. It's about children. This is our opportunity to set up an entirely new family court. And I'm running for one main reason. That's to protect our children and to stop the destruction in our courtrooms. People forget that they're still a family. Even if they're going through a divorce or separation, they forget that the next day they may have a soccer game or a basketball game or a piano recital or a church program to attend. They forget that a few years from now, they're going to be in graduations, weddings, births of grandbabies. The rest of their lives, they're still a family, even if they're not in the same home. And if you tear apart each other in the middle of a courtroom in front of 50 or a dozen or how many people, and you try to rip up the other side, the grandparents, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, along with the parents, you are ripping apart the child. You're slinging mud on the wall, and you're forgetting that this is your child, and this child loves both of you. And if you tear apart a parent, you're tearing apart the child. We've got to stop that. We're families. We're not car accidents. We're not medical malpractice cases. We need a whole new vision for the way we do family court. A whole new vision. We need to focus on the family and be a mending court, not an ending court. That's why I'm running. And I'd appreciate your vote and your support. Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening. I'd also like to thank the Tangipahoa Democrats for this opportunity to have us here so people can kind of get to know both of us. As Lila stated, we are doing something very new and very different in this district. East Baton Rouge Parish has a family court. St. Tammany Parish has a family court. We don't have that. This is a very important election for us. As of October of next year, there will be 2 seats that will handle primarily only family matters, actually. That's custody, divorce, child support, community property, spousal support, and adoptions. So family court is not always about all of the bad things that are going on. There's some good things that go on in family court sometimes. The adoptions are very good. They're very rewarding and very satisfying to not only the families, but also to the children that are being adopted. I know that because my daughter was adopted. It was a great experience. So while we do have issues with families breaking up, I do agree that oftentimes mamas and dads forget about the children that are involved. I'm not going to be here as a judge to make mom and daddy like each other. I can't do that. They've already made a decision on whether or not they like each other. My job will be to ensure that the best interest of the child is protected. And that's exactly what I intend to do. However I need to get there, that's what I'm going to do. However moms and dads work out their problems, that's between mom and dad. I have to help keep mom and dad focused on the child though. And that's certainly what I intend to do. I believe that you need someone with a diverse area of experience in the law. I can provide that to you. I understand making tough decisions. I've done that. I've done that as a public defender, and I've done that even more so recently as an assistant district attorney. It's tough to go into a setting knowing that you're going to put somebody in jail for life because they've done something very wrong. But it's a decision that I've had to make, and it's a decision I've made before. Equally as hard going into a courtroom understanding that a family will be breaking up, and you have to make a decision about where that child may live, when they will visit, what holiday they'll spend with whom. I can make those kinds of decisions. I don't believe necessarily that we need to have a court where everybody's throwing daggers at one another, but I believe in our system. And I believe that our attorneys should address that with their clients prior to coming to court. I can't tell grown folks how to act. They've been raised already. My job is not to raise adult people. My job is to encourage them to act in the best interest of their child. And that's exactly what I'll do. So I ask for your vote and your support on October 19th.
Okay, next First question I'd like to ask you both, and I'm going to start with you, Vanessa, because I think you already alluded to some of this. There was a great article in the Daily Star where you each stated your qualifications. If you would kind of run down your qualifications for this position, and then Lila can follow with hers.
I'll start by first saying, obviously I have my undergraduate degree in political science with a minors in English and history from Middle Tennessee State University. I then went on to law school in Washington, D.C. and became licensed in the state of Maryland. That experience alone gave me an opportunity to see how they handle family matters in a different state, how family court works somewhere other than here in Louisiana. And then I came to and took the bar, and that's kind of a funny thing because with law, you don't just move to another state and say, hey, can I practice law here? No, you have to take the bar all over again. So I prepared to learn Louisiana law, which is a little different than the law in Maryland. I'm originally from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, let me say that. So I'm just right up the street, and I've been back and forth here in Louisiana for over 20 years. Living here primarily for the last 11, 12, I don't even remember now, it's a long time now. And so then I worked as in family law the entirety of my career. I came to work at St. Tammany Parish. I was at St. Tammany Parish when they started that family court system there, the pilot program, but they then have the two family court judges there. And I also worked for the Public Defender's Office doing nothing but non-support. I handle cases for non-custodial parents, which oftentimes were men, but many times, sometimes there were women also, especially when grandparents were involved in taking care of children. I also worked for Mr. Scott Pearloo as an assistant district attorney up until June 30th of this year. So my experience is vast in the law. I also worked as a magistrate for the Village of Tangipahoa for 4 years, and am now serving as alderwoman in the Village of Tangipahoa, also making decisions for the village and for the people in my area. So those are my qualifications as far as education. I believe that we can take a lot of classes and a lot of different things, and certainly I've done so, and I know Lila has too. I chose to make my experience in the law one that's not primarily focused in one area. Because you know what, when you go to family court, you don't just deal with one thing. You deal with people who have criminal backgrounds. You deal with people who may be athletes and entertainers. You deal with people who have had car accidents and have monies coming in, therefore, and we determine how we count those kinds of things. We deal with a lot of different things in family court. You need somebody who understands all of those things and can put all of those things to work for you.
Okay, Lila.
I'm the only candidate in this election who is a board-certified family law specialist. If you needed knee surgery, you would not go to a general practitioner, you'd go to a specialist. I practiced law 38 years. I've represented over 6,000 mothers, fathers, and grandparents. I'm a qualified mediator. I've been a former judge in the 21st Judicial District as a judge pro tempore appointed by the Louisiana Supreme Court. I've been a law professor at LSU and Loyola Law School as an adjunct professor there, and also at Southeastern Louisiana University. I've been on the state disciplinary board for lawyers for 9 years. I'm one of the 100 top family lawyers in the state, and I've been in ever since the Super Lawyers has been designating people since 2007, every year. I've been one of the top 25 women lawyers in the state of Louisiana. I'm on the statewide Law Institute and the Law Institute committee that studied the need for family courts in Louisiana and looked at all the different models around the country. I've been married 34 years. I have 4 children, been through 4 teenagers, been through the good and the bad with the children. I've been through the Eagle Scout ceremony with my son David in the back. I've also been to the jail and the hospitals. And I've learned the power of God and the power of prayer and the grace of God. I'm also the only grandparent who's running in this election. So I understand the importance of grandparents in children's lives. I am the most qualified. I have the extensive experience in family law. That's been my whole career because I love families, I love children, and I love doing practice law. I'm passionate about family law. Thank you.
Okay, we just had the sheriff here, and he talked about not having space in jail for deadbeat dads or moms. I'll ask you to answer first, Lila, and then Vanessa. How would you deal with deadbeat dads or moms who don't pay court-ordered child support?
I think it's a real problem. We have a lot of people who don't pay child support as ordered. Some of them may be 20, 30,000 behind. There are remedies within the system and within the law that you can utilize, like seasoned income tax returns, garnishing wages, taking licenses like fishing license, driver's license away. That's all in the law. But you, at times, you're going to have to put people in jail, and it's a problem. If you don't have a jail, what are you going to do? Now, another thing is if they're working, what do you do? Because you really want them to keep that job. You don't want to lock them up where they lose their job. So why not have them be in jail on the weekends and work during the week? There are ways of doing that, but if you don't have space in the jail, you've got a problem. It is a problem. So you've got to think outside the box and figure out, well, what can we do? And a lot of times, if you put somebody in jail for 6 hours, they come up with the money.
And that's the same question.
The question is, how would I handle that situation?
How would you handle deadbeat dads or moms if you were the judge in the panel?
Well, I absolutely believe in responsibility and accountability. I have two very wonderful children. My son is here tonight, Michael. He is at LSU in his 3rd year. My daughter has graduated from LSU, and she's in law school and will be graduating from law school in May of 2014. And I had to work to take care of my children. And I feel like everyone else should have to do that too. So I believe that if you're ordered to pay child support, simply, you need to pay child support. And if you do not, I will hold you accountable. And if that means putting you in jail, I don't have a problem with that at all. Because children are going to be first and foremost, and you are going to be a responsible parent in my courtroom.
Judge Edwards was here tonight with the sheriff. Can you explain, and Lila, and Vanessa, you'll go first this time, the difference between family court and juvenile court?
Oh, absolutely. It's quite simple. Juvenile court handles OCS cases and juvenile delinquency cases, truancy cases also. When children don't go to school, you end up in Judge Edwards' court. When you have children that are fighting or misbehaving, using drugs, doing things like that, you end up in juvenile court. When somebody's been investigated because they're not properly taking care of their children, or something else has happened, a child is born addicted to drugs, and the parents are held accountable for that, that goes through OCS court. We don't handle those things in family court. Family court are for all of those family matters outside of those kinds of things. So I guess that's the simplest way to explain it. If it's not an OCS case, it's not a juvenile case, meaning handling a minor, or truancy, then it goes to juvenile court. Everything else is family related will come to our court.
Do you want to add anything to that, Lila?
Just going through what family court does. It's going to be doing the divorces, the custody, the child support, the spouse abuse, the protective orders, the support enforcement for child support, and the civil adoptions, and community property.
So there's no duplication in these courts?
No.
And this is a new court? There's
Yes.
no sitting judge in this court? No, we don't even have this court. It's new. It's going to be set up.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay. How would you handle input about a family crisis from other family members and friends who may have a valuable objective view of the situation, but they also may have a personal bias or an axe to grind? And Lila, I'll ask you to answer that first. That outside information from other family members who may or may not have their own agenda.
Are you talking about in the courtroom?
Yes.
If they're presented as witnesses, then I certainly would listen to it. I'm not quite sure about what your question is. If it's part of the evidence, I will look at it and see what is most important, is what's the best interest of the children. There are 12 factors in a custody case, and one of them is the family and school history of the children and the objective information from neighbors, family members, teachers, doctors. All of that is important. So I will listen to all of that and still focus on what's best for the children.
Vanessa, did you want to?
Well, I think as a litigator, we tend to learn where people's interests are and why they're there. So just doing this over and over again, you understand and you can see pretty quickly if somebody has another motive there. So certainly if they're presented as witnesses, I have to listen to them, and I have to watch them, judge their credibility, determine whether or not I believe they're telling me the truth, regardless of what their motive is. And then everything else will flesh itself out. Because as long as you are doing, as I'm doing my job, which is ensuring the best interest of the child, I don't really care what your motive is. I just want to get whatever information I need out of you to furnish the best possible solution for that child.
Both of you keep saying that it's the best interest of the child that is primary in this court. And certainly in these cases, a lot of evidence is presented. When you're looking at situations like this where parents are at odds and the family seems to be divided, how do you determine where that child will live? And are the child's wishes taken into account? And Vanessa, we'll have you go first.
She mentioned these 12 factors. One of the factors that we consider is what the child would like. I always say this, and this is very important to me. We don't let children make decisions. They're children. Their mind's not developed well enough. I will not allow them to manipulate the court in a way that we see happening sometimes. And what I mean by that is sometimes children will say, well, I want to go live with mama. And they'll go tell daddy. They'll tell mama everything daddy's done wrong and nothing that daddy's done good. And so they'll get mama all riled up and ready to go and get her going into court to say daddy's such a bad dad, and then they'll get with mom, and then mom won't let them do what they want to do, and then all of a sudden mom's really the bad person now, and now they start to manipulate, going both ways. I tell people this all the time. Children are very, very manipulative. I know I have a boy and a girl, and they both got me really good, many times. And their dad would always say, about my son particularly, that boy has you wrapped around his little finger. I'm like, no, he doesn't. My baby, no, my Mikey, he would never do that. Yes, he still has me wrapped around his finger. But we have to realize that parents are responsible for children for a reason. And that's because they haven't experienced life, developed properly to make those kinds of decisions. Certainly, I believe that children have a great amount of input to give us when we come to court. Because we don't know that children are watching us most of the time and listening and paying attention to everything that we're doing. When we're not paying attention to what we're doing because we're angry with the other person or someone else. So I think it's very, very important to have their input. But in no way would I allow a child to make that decision on that factor alone. Now, if all other things are even, then perhaps I put more weight on the preference of the child. But I really have to look at the entire picture and not just make that. And the law requires that I do that.
When you asked a two-part question, how do we determine where a child lives, and what about the children's desires? If you start with the first one, we have the 12 factors. We look for the best interest of the child, and there a lot of the 12 factors include the history, the continuity, how close the parents live to each other, and the children's preference is one of them. But one of the most important factors, and it's not listened to very much or looked at very much, is the willingness and the ability of a parent to foster a loving relationship between the child and the other parent. The judge can focus on that issue. And that's part of the whole thing that I'm thinking of not slinging mud. If I have a parent in that courtroom who is spitting venom and wants to destroy the other side, that's going to come out. Not just in that courtroom, it's going to come out with the children. You know that they can't hide it from the children. So the children are torn apart, and they see that anger, that bitterness every day against the other parent. Give me 5 cases like that, and I rule against that person and give custody to the other side, and we're going to nip it in the bud. We're going to stop that. People are got to stop destroying the other parent. And that's one thing. That's one of the major factors in my mind. On the children's desire, I want to tell you about my history with the children's desires. I'm a bulldog litigator. I won my cases. You could ask all the judges. I go in there, I'm prepared, I'm a fighter, and I win. But I didn't win. I did not win because those same children that I took to talk to the judge and to tell the judge what they wanted, where they wanted to live, those same children started coming back to see me 10 and 15 years later. And what they were saying was that when I asked them, what did you think about the time I took you to see Judge so-and-so? Every one of them said, I hated it, and I hate my mother for making me testify, or I hate my daddy for trashing my mom, or I hate both of them for putting us through it. And their lives were messed up, and their marriages were messed up, and their children were messed up. That's what I've seen, and so I will do everything in my power to prevent children from testifying, because it messes them up and their families.
Okay, Lila, we'll have you answer this question first, and then Vanessa. You've done it. You've made this decision. The child's going to live here. This other parent is going to visit. And maybe that works for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, the other parent doesn't show up, or seems to lose interest, or it's just not working. How can you, and this is really stretching it from this question, how can you somehow protect that child from future disappointment when you make that decision? Is there some way that you can smooth the way for that other parent to visit so that this will be a successful solution?
First of all, I don't use the term visitation. It's a term that relegates a parent to a second-class role. I use the term physical custody periods, the time the person is going to have with a child. It could be 2 days a week. It could be every other weekend. It could be 3 or 4 days a week. It's the physical custody period. How do you protect a child from disappointment when the parent is not visiting, or that's not a good term, when they're not exercising their physical custody period? You can't. You can't protect them from the disappointment when they have their suitcase packed, they're ready to go, and mother or daddy doesn't show up. They will never forget that hurt. The parent who has primary custody can bring us contempt action against the parent who didn't show up. But how do you make parents do something? You can put them in jail if there's jail space. But does that make them become a good parent? This is human nature. If they're not going to be a good parent, the child is going to be disappointed. You can't protect them. As far as the ones who are, the children may want to be with one parent instead of the other, yeah, they're going to have to live with that, and most children are adaptable. In social science research, and I've studied this for years, and I've analyzed it, and I've seen it in my clients, and I've talked to teachers and principals, what you find out is that worse than the physical custody period, what's more important is how cooperative the parents are. And if the parents can work together for the children have a better chance of making it in life. That's what if any social science research is going to show, and what your teachers and parents and my clients will tell you. So, but can the judge make them behave like they should? No. The judge can do some punishment and encouragement, but the judge can't make that parent be a part of the child's life.
I'm going to ask you to answer the same question, Vanessa, but first I'd like to share a personal experience. I remember sitting in Wendy's one day, and there was a man sitting alone at a table right next to mine, and he was just sitting there, and a woman walked in with a little boy and plopped him in the chair and walked out. And this was their exchange of that child. The child just sat there and stared straight ahead like he was in shock. And it looked like Dad was in shock, and it looked like Mom wasn't very happy. So, you know, is there some way to smooth that transition that would keep that child from being disappointed or hurt?
Well, you can always order co-parenting classes and require that the parents go to co-parenting classes, or even enter in some kind of counseling and make that an order. It's really simple. And I say this all the time. I cannot make a mom be a mother, and I can't make a dad be a father. I cannot. I don't have that power at all. I wish we could protect the children from the her biological father wouldn't show up time after time after time, and he would call her and say he's on his way. I dealt with that personally. I know that hurt as a parent to watch that go on. I know how that feels. So that's a really sore spot for me. All I could do as a mother, though, was to let my daughter know how great she really was. And that his reaction or actions had nothing to do with the kind of person that she is, because she's brilliant. And so I would say to the other parents, if they were to come to court with that issue, to encourage your child and make them understand how wonderful they are, and help soothe the pain, because they're gonna feel it. But you know what? That's a part of life. And feeling that pain and learning how to deal with that pain prepares you for other pains you will feel in life. Now, as a judge, I certainly can put it to the parent who doesn't find this important enough to come visit with their child. And what I mean by that is you can't hold them in contempt of court. You can't even take away some of that visitation, which clearly they don't seem to want anyway. That may perhaps stop the child from being anxious or expecting that visitation to occur, because it's not there anymore. But in the long haul, there's no possible way I can protect that child's heart. I can't do that.
We'll ask you to answer this question first, and it's about adoption, and so maybe particularly pertinent to you. In an adoption or custody case, you're dealing with people, human beings, of course, who may be fine, upstanding citizens now, but maybe earlier in their life they weren't. Maybe they have some history there. How would you handle that? Say that parent, proposed parent or proposed person who wanted custody of the child had a history of drug abuse, but that was 20 years ago. Do those kinds of factors weigh in? How do you deal with that?
Personally, I had my daughter when I was 18 years old, right out of high school. And I went to college, and I went to law school, and I worked my way through college, and I worked my way through law school, or let me say my better half worked for me through law school. And I found a very, very loving, supportive man who adopted my daughter. Thank you, Lord. But with all of that, if someone were now to say, for instance, I'm not voting for her, because she had a baby when she was 18 years old. Doing that, she had a baby out of wedlock. Well, that would be their choice, but that perhaps may be a very big mistake. Because I learned from the mistakes that I made. And I figured out how to be what I'm gonna say is a wonderful parent. I've done really well with my children. Not because of me, but because of the grace of God. So I know that people make mistakes, but that doesn't make them bad parents or bad people. It just means they made some bad decisions. And all of us, one bad decision away from it. So I'm gonna look at what you're doing right now. I'm gonna look at what you're doing with your life right now. I wanna make sure that, okay, you were involved with some drugs, but you haven't had any tendency to kind of fall back in and get mixed back up with that. And if you're doing what you need to do, I'm not going back 20 years ago. I'm gonna look at you right now. But certainly if someone raises the issue and says, well, they're a drug addict, well, we need to know. Well, let's get you tested, because certainly if you hadn't used in 20 years, you don't have a problem going to get a hair follicle test. Now let's just make sure everything is okay. But no, if they're doing what they're supposed to do now, I certainly can't ignore it, because trust me, the other parent's gonna make sure I know about it. And I'm gonna let them know. You picked them. Did you know about that then? So now what tends to happen when we come to court is when people don't get along anymore, they throw off, as Lila said, they want to throw up every bad thing that has ever happened to that other person. And they knew most of that stuff when they got with them and made a baby with them. That's just the reality of it. So I'm going to look at right now, and how do you react with your child and interact with your child, and what kind of relationship do you have with your child? That's what I'm going to make my decision on, not what you did 20 years ago.
Lila, same question?
I do think people can change. I've seen it in my own life with my own children. You can have drug and alcohol and other issues in your life, and you can make changes and be fine, and be good parents. You got to look at what's best for the child. You got to look at the history of the child and the history of the parties. That's the mental health of the family, the drug abuse. Those are factors that you look at. And you do see what is best for the child at this gonna do a little demonstration. Suppose this is the body of knowledge that a judge needs to have in order to make a decision about a child in a custody case. This piece of paper. The client remembers to tell the lawyer half of that. The lawyer, being a lawyer, only hears half of it. The lawyer thinks the judge only needs to hear half of that. The judge only lets in half of that because of evidence rules. And the judge, being a judge and a human being, only hears this much. Do you and do parents want their child's life and future and everybody around them who are involved with this child, the custody of that child be decided on this little bit of information? Absolutely not. That is absurd. And so when you talk about change, yeah, people can change. People can change, but we need the whole picture of a child. If I'm going to have to make a decision about a child, I want a lot more information than this. But I'm a stranger. If I can get those two parents to sit down and work it out, that's what I'm going to do. But yes, I do believe that people can change, and for the better, but you got to look at what's been happening, and not just in the last 2 months they've straightened up their life. Let's look at a pattern over the last few years.
The first family court that I ever became aware of involved a king named Solomon who was deciding a custody case between two women. And he determined a particularly innovative way to determine which parent was telling the truth. But that choice is not up to you. You don't have that choice. So how do you determine, and Lila, will have you answer this first. This will be the last question, then we'll have closing statements. How do you determine if people are telling the truth? How is a judge sitting on that bench determine what is true?
No judge is infallible. You look at them, you look at their eyes, you look at their hand motions, you look at their body language, you see that, you see whether they're consistent in their statements, you look at their motives, what's driving them, what's the real thing here? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it resentment? Is it bitterness? What is driving this person? You look and see if their first focus is on the children. I remember when I was in my litigating self, I would make my client write the word love on their hand. Said, don't you dare get up there on that witness stand and do anything out of love. I mean, not out of love. I mean, everything you do has got to be because you love your child. And I made them write that on their hand, every one of them. And they'd get up there, and whenever they started going off on tangents, I'd come to like this and get them to look at their hand again. Because I want them to focus on what's best for the children, and the judge can stop the lawyers from ratcheting up the anger and the win and the let's fight mode, because that's what we were taught in law school, is to win, be an advocate. The judge can stop that. And so the judge needs to look at them and see what they're doing and what their motive is. That's the main thing.
Vanessa?
Well, I think you do it just like you do every day with anybody else that you talk to. Whenever you talk to anybody, you determine whether or not they're telling you the truth, in particular, your children probably. When I would ask my children, how did that get there? And they would both say, I don't know, I didn't do it. No. And we had this joke in my house, oh, the ghost did it? That's the ghost did that again? Because nobody ever knew when anything happened. So unfortunately, most of the time I thought it was my son because he was the trickster in the house. So I always blame my son for everything most of the time. But I would have to look at him and can tell if my son was telling me the truth, because he usually could not keep a straight face if he's lying. He's gonna smirk or do something that was gonna give it away. And most of the time I I just didn't want to see it. My daughter would say, see, Ma, see, he's smiling. See there, you see he's laughing. He's telling you a lie, Mom. He's not telling the truth. So you do it just the same way. You watch somebody as you talk to them and see if they're paying attention. See what they're talking about. See if they can look you directly in the eye if they're telling that lie to you. Some of them are really good. And as a litigator, you get to know that because you know before you go into court what your client is like. You know the kind of person. And I don't know. When I went to law school, yeah, it's all about winning, but for me, it wasn't, and not ever in my practice. I can be a bulldog lawyer, if you will, and lose because I come out with that child being protected and still did what I believe was best for my client. Sometimes they didn't understand that at the moment, but when it's all over, first of all, nobody's winning in court. Nobody's winning in court. The lawyer may come out with a win, and she feels she's won. That family's torn apart. There's no winners. So we have to go through and handle it just like we handle our everyday life experiences when we're dealing with any person. Take a look at them, take a listen to them, make a determination of whether you feel they're credible or not. And if they're not, you make a judgment call.
Okay, I don't think there are any other additional questions. Okay, Benny's trying to read my lips back there, so I'm apology. So I will now ask you to make your closing statements, and Vanessa will come in.
Again, I thank you all for coming out. I thank you for this interest in this race. This is a very important race for us. It is an opportunity for us to make history here in more ways than one. And it is an opportunity for us to choose a person we feel is going to do a good job for the long haul. I am asking you all to consider me. There's certainly things that Lila and I have that are very different. There's certainly things that, are obviously different, and she's going to have longer time to practice, and I can't ever overcome that. I mean, just because. I have no disrespect for this woman at all, and you won't hear me disrespecting her or anybody else in this race. I don't feel it's important for me to make somebody look bad to make me look good. I stand on my own, and I think I do that pretty well myself. So I ask you to look into the candidates and ask around about and talk to folks that are in the courtroom, that the judges, the bailiffs, the other people who work in our area, the other lawyers, and make a decision based on who you believe is the best person for you. I ask you for your vote on October 19th.
Okay, Lila?
I want to thank you for doing this. This has been actually very interesting and fun for me. Thank you to the Tangi Democrats for doing this. The election is not about politics. As I said when I started, it's about our families and our children. This is such an important election. This is our chance to set up a good court with a new vision. And I do believe that we can help parents do what's right for their children. I do believe if I can see everybody up front in the beginning of their case, and I can persuade at least half of them not to fight. From the Supreme Court, we have 4,490 new cases every year. New cases. If you double and triple that for the repeat cases, people coming in for rules for contempt or changing custody, changing child support, you're looking at about 15,000 to 20,000 cases a year in our district. Livingston, Tangipahoa, St. Helena. We've got to stop the destruction in our courtroom. We have to get people in and out of the court process as soon as possible. They can have their option. If they want their day in court, they're going to get it. But I'm going to do my best to persuade them not to take that day in court and let them make the best decision for their children. And that we're going to have help. We're going to have 2 hearing officers who are going to be available. They will be trained, qualified mediators. They will have the option to go to the mediators. If they don't want that, if they want their day in court, they're going to get it. But I can assure you I will treat every family and every person with fairness, consistency, and compassion, and I will hold people accountable for their actions, focusing on the children. This election is going to have a lot of political stuff being slung around. It's not about politics. I want you to know up front, I am pro-life. I've always been pro-life. If you start hearing things from anybody, think in terms of what is best for the children. Who's the one that's going to focus on a new vision, a new way of handling family cases? That's why I'm running. I'm 62 years old. I'm knocking on doors in 99-degree heat. Why am I doing it? I'm doing it not for me. I don't have an ambition to be a judge. If I had wanted to run for judge, I would have run for judge 20 years ago. I am running because it's our chance to set up a whole new way of looking at family matters in our courts. This is our chance. I'd appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank everybody who's been helping me. My volunteers have been wonderful, and I appreciate your vote and your support. Thank you.
Thanks to both candidates for coming tonight and sharing all this information with us, and you've all been a wonderful, wonderful audience, very attentive. I know that they will both be on Johnny Chauvin's show on September 30th, along with the Republican candidate. And I know the Daily Star is running a series of information about all the candidates, so I urge you to continue to learn about the candidates and make the decision that's closest to your heart. Early election is October 5th, election day is October 19th. Also on that ballot, the tax for the library and the tax for the jail, and some congressional candidates. We have some information outside of what district, it's Congressional District 5, which consists of the north end of the parish. And we have a list of all the Democratic candidates. You have to find out the Republicans on your own. So we have all the Democratic candidates out there. So please take up that information and make sure that you make a decision for that on the ballot as well. Thanks to the Tangi Democrats for doing this, for our timekeeper who didn't have a whole lot to do tonight. Thanks to our very wonderful candidates. And thank you again to our candidates.